All right, so today we are diving into the ideas of Nicolás Maquiavelo. You know, that guy, the ends justify the means kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
But is that really all there is to this guy? I feel like we're doing him a disservice, if that's all we can say.
Oh, absolutely. It's like saying that like a saltine cracker is a 5-course meal. Machiavelli was a really smart guy. He was living in crazy times, and his ideas about power and morality and leadership are so much more complex than that one quote.
Okay, this is why we do this deep dive. So to understand Machiavelli, we need to understand his world, right?
Yeah.
It's like trying to understand a painter without looking at their palette. So
Yeah.
hit me with some Renaissance basics. What was Italy like back then?
Okay, so picture this. It's the 1400s and the 1500s. We're talking peak Renaissance, but forget about a unified Italy. Instead, you have all these independent city-states, Florence, Venice, Rome, and they're all constantly struggling for power.
So basically Game of Thrones, but with like way better art.
Exactly. You got alliances, betrayals, backstabbing, all of it. And then in the middle of this political chess game, you have these powerful families like the Medici rising to the top. They were major players in Florence with tons of wealth and influence.
Okay, and this is where Machiavelli enters the scene. He wasn't just some observer, he was right there in it all.
Oh, absolutely. This wasn't just theory for this guy, it was his life. He saw firsthand how power was used, the ways that alliances would crumble, how ruthlessness was often necessary to survive in this cutthroat political world. Think about it. How would you act if you were constantly surrounded by people playing these power games? It would totally change your view of the world.
You're telling me. So how did all of this actually shape his thinking?
So imagine living through the Cold War where things could change at any second and you'd never know who to trust. That was Machiavelli's reality. He saw firsthand that a ruler really has to be adaptable, pragmatic, and maybe even a little bit ruthless if they want to survive and protect their people. It wasn't always pretty, but that was the reality of the situation.
Okay, so we've got this guy living in what sounds like a pressure cooker of politics.
Yeah.
That's got to leave a mark. But how did he go from just an observer to like Machiavelli, the guy everyone associates with power moves?
Well, that's where his own story comes in, and let me tell you, it's a wild one.
Okay, so we've got Machiavelli, our guy, living in a pressure cooker of politics. Give me the highlight reel. How does he go from a dude with some ideas to like the Machiavelli?
Well, our sources dive into his biography here, and it's wild. To say the least, born in Florence in 1469, right when the city was like this explosion of art and culture, and of course those power struggles we talked about.
Okay.
And Machiavelli gets a top-notch humanist education, meaning he's digging into the classics, ancient Greek and Roman literature, philosophy, history, you name it.
So a classic overachiever. What's next?
And this wasn't just for show. Machiavelli was really fascinated by the Romans, especially the Roman Republic. He saw their history as like this case study in power, virtue, and the common good.
Okay.
And this is where he starts to form those big ideas about what makes a society tick.
Okay, so he's got the book smarts, but how does that translate to real-world experience? How does he go from student to player in this game of Renaissance politics?
Well, in 1494, he lands a pretty sweet gig, secretary to the Second Republic of Florence.
Hold up, Second Republic. Yeah. Did I miss something?
Remember those Medici folks who loved a good power grab?
Huh?
They ruled Florence for a while, but they got booted out, and a republic was formed in their place. That's Republic number 1.
Okay. So Machiavelli gets to be a diplomat then. That's got to be way more exciting than just reading about it.
You bet. He is thrust right into the heart of Florentine politics. Responsible for diplomatic missions, negotiating with other Italian states, even dabbling in military affairs.
Wow. Okay, but you mentioned something about prison and torture. Don't leave me hanging.
Oh, right, because those Medici... Well, they always seem to make a comeback. And in 1512, they're back in charge in Florence. And let's just say they weren't too happy with anyone who had been part of the Republic.
Yeah, I don't imagine those guys were big on forgiveness.
Yeah.
So where does that leave Machiavelli?
He's in hot water. Accused of conspiracy, thrown in prison, and even tortured. Imagine the things going through his head during those long days locked up. He'd seen the highs of political power, and now he's experiencing the brutal lows of defeat.
Talk about a crash course in the dark side of power. I bet that experience added a few chapters to his book of life.
Absolutely. This period of hardship and reflection really impacted his worldview. He witnessed firsthand the fickleness of fate, the brutal nature of political power, and how even the smartest, most capable person can be brought down. He'd seen it happen to others, and now he'd experienced it himself.
Okay, so he gets out of prison, but it doesn't end there, does it?
No, it doesn't. He's exiled from Florence, banished, forced to live out in the cold, politically speaking at least.
Yeah.
Imagine being at the top of your game only to have it all ripped away.
From high-powered diplomat to exile, it's quite a fall from grace. No
Yeah.
wonder he had a lot to say about power and how it works. So is that when he starts writing? Is exile when Machiavelli, the political theorist, is truly born?
Exactly. He pours his heart, soul, and all those hard-won lessons into his writing, The Prince. His most famous work is born during this period of exile. It's almost as if he's dissecting power itself, analyzing what he'd learned from being both a player and a pawn in the game.
Okay, so we've talked about Machiavelli's crazy life, all the drama of Renaissance Italy, and how those experiences really shaped how he saw the world. But let's get to the good stuff. His work. And I'm not just talking about The Prince here. I'm ready to go full Machiavelli scholar.
All right, buckle up, because The Prince is really just the tip of the iceberg with this guy. Machiavelli was a writing machine, and his other works go even deeper into power, government, what it means to be a leader, you name it.
Okay, lay it on me. What other Machiavellian masterpieces are we missing out on?
One that really stands out is his discourses on the first 10 books of Titus Livius. Yeah, it's a mouthful, I know.
A bit of a tongue twister.
But stick with me. In it, Machiavelli really dives deep into the Roman Republic, breaking down what made it work, what caused it to fail, and what lessons we can learn from it all these centuries later.
So more history lessons from Professor Machiavelli. I'm sensing a theme here, but here's where I get tripped up. The Prince seems to be all about that strong, even ruthless leader. Is he contradicting himself? Did exile give him like a change of heart?
See, that's the thing about Machiavelli that makes him so fascinating. He's full of these seeming contradictions. In The Prince, he's giving us this blueprint for ruling with an iron fist. But in the discourses, he actually argues for, well, republic.
Oh, plot twist. So the ends justify the means. Guy also thought people should have a say in their government. My brain's a little fried.
Right. He saw the value in a government where citizens have a voice they can participate in decision-making, a system that he thought could be more stable and more just. But remember, he's also a pragmatist. He's not saying republics are perfect or that they always work out. He's looking at the good and the bad, the realities of power, no matter what the system.
Okay, so maybe not a contradiction, but definitely two sides of the same coin. We've got The Prince, the guide to ruthless leadership, and then the discourses, his love letter to republics. Anything else we should add to the Machiavelli reading list?
Well, if you're into military strategy, The Art of War is a must-read. It's Machiavelli tackling strategy tactics and the importance of a strong military for any state that wants to well survive.
Which sounds pretty relevant even today.
Right. Machiavelli understood that power isn't just about talk and diplomacy, it's about having the strength to back it up. And in a world where there's always some kind of conflict going on, those lessons are definitely still relevant.
Okay, so we've got this guy, lived over 500 years ago, wrote about some pretty intense stuff, full of contradictions. Why does any of this matter to us now? Help me connect the dots.
Because Machiavelli's work isn't just ancient history, it's about understanding human nature, how we crave power, how we use it, and how often it's a really messy, complicated game. And that, my friend, is timeless.
So you're saying that whether it's a king fighting for more land or a CEO trying to crush the competition, the Machiavellian playbook is still in effect.
I mean, think about it. Have you ever had a boss pull a power move that totally blindsided everyone? Or seen a politician promise one thing and do the complete opposite?
Happens all the time.
That's Machiavelli's world. He's telling us that to really understand power, you have to understand the games people play, the compromises they make, the tough choices they face.
It's like he's giving us a backstage pass to how power really works. But he's also making us think about the ethical lines people cross in the name of ambition.
Exactly. He's not necessarily condoning ruthlessness, but he's holding up a mirror to human nature and making us confront those uncomfortable truths about power. That's why politicians, business leaders, really anyone who wants to understand how influence works is still reading Machiavelli today. It's not always pretty, but it's always relevant.
You know, after this deep dive, I'm seeing Machiavelli less as the ends justify the means guy, and more as someone who really understood the game of power and wanted to give other people the tools to play it, or at least understand the rules. It's kind of a know your enemy and maybe even yourself kind of message.
I like that Machiavelli makes us think critically about power, how it's used, and how it's abused. He reminds us that going after power often involves moral compromises, calculated risks, and a deep understanding of how people work. And that's a conversation we should keep having, even maybe especially 500 years later.
And that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating.
Yeah.
We can look back at history, learn from these figures like Machiavelli, and apply those insights to the world around us. Like they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Couldn't agree more. So next time you see a power move, whether it's on the news or in your own life, remember Machiavelli. You might be surprised by how much his insights can help you understand what's really going on.
And on that note, that's a wrap on our deep dive into the world of Nicolás Maquiavelo. We'll be back next time with another fascinating figure from history to unpack and explore.